We are going to talk about anything you want to hear about. We will talk over each other. Think of us as the View. We won't be as noisy, and we each have our own microphone. But we're going to talk about food. And we're going to we might as well start on the left. Priscilla wants to talk a little bit about how to write a recipe.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I also want to talk about something that will tie to what Pam and some of Linda's experience. But I write culinary textbooks that are used all over North America and in Asia, and they're really the leaders on cooking and on baking. I've been doing that for 17 years. So the demand on writing recipes is really heavy with what we do because our audience are definitely using the recipes every day, year after year, and we certainly hear from people if a recipe doesn't work. So I also teach food writing at Gateway Community College in New Haven, and there's a culinary program there, and the students, some of them for certain programs are required, and one of the subjects is recipe writing, and since you're here and we're talking about food writing, that's one of the categories that comes right up, because there are conventions, and I think anybody in this room that's made a recipe that didn't work or found a typo certainly knows that there's a lot to be concerned with. And I want to say that the cake that you're eating is made with almond flour, no wheat flour, and eggs and sugar. It's called Reine de Saba, the Queen of Sheba. And because Pem is gluten-free, and I thought that it was her birthday too, that's why we have that. But what I wanted to say really, which segues to Pem and really will tie, is something that I think relates to an audience of people that are interested in food. When I teach food writing, we have to do the mechanics of writing recipes or the mechanics of making a pitch to a food magazine to get your story published. But we start by writing personal essays. And I found that using food as a subject matter, A, it's really easy for the students of any age because it's all part of our lives. But B, it's really a great platform to engage your audience because you're all sitting here because that word food and writing have appealed to you in some way. And I found it's been an incredible dynamic. And one of my students was adopted by a Jewish family in New Haven, but native from Bolivia. So it was kind of disconcerting with his name, and he wrote about latkes and talked Spanish. It was very confusing. And he wrote the most poignant memoir story about rice pudding. That was the subject, but it had to do with a memory of being brought up in an orphanage in Latin America, and it wasn't just rice pudding. It was that particular kind from that culture. And, using that simple subject and a memory, he was able to create something that brought all of us, the class of 20 people, all right into this story in a very emotional way. He was a good writer, but not a brilliant writer. He was a kid. So that's sort of an example that I thought ties to what Pem wanted to speak about in terms of where food goes in writing.
Well, it is true, and I have had quite a number of other jobs, which I'll mention in a minute, but on my way here, I stopped at one of our local markets, well, actually in Old Saybrook and a couple towns over, and I got to talking with one of the shopkeepers, and she was very friendly, and so I introduced myself. She's Elizabeth. I said, my name's Pem, and she goes, I know you. I go, really? And she goes, yeah, you write Food Court. So now I have had a lot of journalism jobs. I've been a town hall reporter. I've covered police beat, city editor, business editor, politics editor, aerospace reporter, banking reporter. I've won awards for environmental reporting, mental health reporting, the opioid crisis, and diversity. But nobody ever stopped me in the grocery store, pretty much. So the handout that I provided you with, I thought, is a good example of how food writing can really be more than, or how food writing can encompass so many other parts of our life. So this is a story about a young woman, Fatima, who came here from Syria. She's 25 now. And so this story is about her journey here, how she became involved in a food program in New Haven called Sanctuary Kitchen, which if you don't know about yet, you should definitely find out about. But it's not just about food. It's about, like I start the story with common ground, like childhood memories, which we can all relate to. And then I move into an international event, which is the war in Syria, and make reference to the fact that it's created this massive diaspora, like worldwide, and so people like Fatima and her family are coming here. Then I move on to, they were set to fly to Indiana, and you can read the details later, but they got turned away from Indiana because there was a national debate at the time in immigration, which I think we're all familiar with at this point. And then after they were turned away from Indiana, then our governor here, who really didn't like the governor in Indiana, decided to make a point and invited her and her family here. And so that sort of tapped into a statewide debate about immigration. And then so I move on, and I mention so on the second page, about almost all the way down at the column, I'm mentioning the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq, many other countries, again reinforcing the notion that there is this massive, both conflict-generated and resource-related, people, massive millions of people. I think at last count, 65.6 million people having been displaced in the world today because of this forcible displacement. And so then we move on, and we're talking more about what an amazing woman she is. She's 24, she's here, she can barely speak the language, but she's teaching cooking classes, running a catering business, learning English, going to school to learn a health-related profession. She has a son, she just had another baby. This is somebody, we can care about. And then she has this quote, almost at the end of the story: if you cook for someone you love, your food will be amazing. And this is one of the things many things I love about writing about food. Food is not just food. Food is love. And so it's also all these other things. And so it's just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to, if you read the story, it's really about a girl and her coming to this country, but it's also reinforcing so much of what else is going on in the world in a way that I sort of call it like the gateway drug to sort of the bigger stories, and perhaps, like the stories really about immigration or whatever, but it gets people reading about things and thinking about things in a new way that's very accessible.
Well, I'm going to, I guess, piggyback onto what Priscilla said about recipe writing. The importance of a well-written recipe, one that is clear, one that's correct. In my 35 years at the paper, obviously we ran zillions of recipes. They were my lifeline. They were also the bane of my existence at times because we made mistakes. I'll say it. There were times when 5 sets of eyes read a recipe and didn't catch a mistake. I do want to tell you one story. We used to run a column that Jane and Michael Stern wrote, the road food people, and they wrote about a southern diner that made this sour cream banana pound cake. And I will also say that for some reason, if we had a mistake in a salad, I never got that many calls. But if there was a mistake in a dessert, my phone, I never got anything done that day. The phone rang off the hook. So I had barely sat down that morning, and the phone rings, and this woman says, "This recipe doesn't work. I tried the banana cake, and it fell flat." So, I went through the recipe with her. I tried to figure out if she had done something wrong, whatever. No. Now I call the Sterns, and I did test a lot of the recipes that we ran. With a column like that, I left it up to the writers to do the testing. And I never was quite sure whether they actually did test that recipe. They swore the recipe was fine. But by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after I'd gotten a million calls, I thought, all right, I know what I'm doing tonight. And I went home and I made these cakes. It made 2 loaf pan-sized cakes. I took them out of the oven. They were gorgeous, just beautiful. And before my eyes, they sank down to pancakes. So now I know something's definitely wrong. The next morning, I had coincidentally had an interview set up with Susan Purdy
do you know, who's a cookbook writer out of Litchfield, and she had just written a baking book. And poor Susan, before she even sat down, I said to her, "You have to solve a problem for me," and told her what had happened. And she gave me some pointers. She said, "Look, you know, you've got sour cream, which is heavy. You've got banana, which is heavy. You can't, you need to add some leavening to this. It's got to be not quite a traditional pound cake." So sure enough, I went home. I made them using her suggestions, and they came out fine. But now I had to let all these people know what was going on. And normally, we did run a correction, but again, people often ask me where I came up with ideas. There was no way that this shouldn't be a cover, and it was a cover story the following week. At the time, Pratt Street in Hartford was under construction, and they were putting in brick sidewalks. So when I went to photo to talk about how we were going to illustrate this story in the cover, Michael McAndrews, who was a photographer at the Courant at the time and was a really wonderful photographer and a great food photographer, he said, "I've got an idea." And we ended up, I baked the cake again. He took it down to Pratt Street. In the picture, you saw kind of the lower half of a mason who was putting in the bricks, and the cake was sitting right next to the brick. So, I mean, we got a big charge out of it. You know, people still were calling, and it really was a way to get the point across. But recipe writing can be pretty difficult, and you have to really take into consideration varying levels of experience that people have. You know, we took nothing for granted, and I quickly realized that even we had to measure down to even the quarter teaspoon salt, because there were a lot of people who just didn't have the confidence to even, you know, do salt to taste or make adjustments in a recipe. So.
And to go back to what Pem was talking about the fact that the immigrants who come to this country, and most of us are immigrants. I'm first generation on one side, second on the other. I once wrote a piece for Linda when she was at the Hartford Courant, and it was about the salt cod, and the fact that almost every country has something to do with it. Now, we're talking about, there were no newspapers when it started. There was no, obviously, internet. There was no way that these people, somebody from Syria, had known someone from Portugal.
Yeah, but there were a bunch of Vikings and Portuguese.
There are, but that's how, it's so interesting that when you think about food in general, you don't realize that we are all the same. We all want to nurture our family and our friends at our tables, whether the table is on a sand floor, whether it's Thanksgiving for 20. We are all the same people when it comes to food. And it used to be the women that did the food. That isn't the case anymore. We've got some guys here tonight. You are cooking too. My father never cooked, but we are all cooking now. We are all going to restaurants. We are learning about food. I talked last week about something that is on Moth Radio. I don't know if you were all here last week. This was something that I heard on NPR on my way from a movie to home, and it talked about a restaurant in the Vineyard, and this was called Three Chefs and a Meal. And on the way home, I cried because it was just so beautiful. This is the sort of thing that we all have so much to do with.
Yeah, well, in my world, the crying is when you're fighting with your co-author about whether you should make the corn muffin gluten-free or teach the kids the basic corn muffin. That's, you know.
Priscilla is doing the On Baking, is that the fifth edition?
So I was just in Houston with my Belgian-born and trained highly skilled, fantastically talented pastry chef co-author, and me, and I'm more of a bread, rustic kind of person. And our mission is to update a book for teaching, and we have a limited number of pages, so I have to always juggle giving him the ability to express himself artistically while being practical of what of our teachers need to learn. So yes, the crying is usually done by moi.
Well, the crying happened to me last night when I wrecked a cheesecake.
Oh, right.
Yeah. You all
Those
heard about
of
this?
you who are on Facebook with me, it is, making a cheesecake is the easiest thing in the world. You just sort of have to pay attention. And I think I stay attention. I have two ovens. I have a little one and a big one. I had to first do the vanilla wafers for the crust. That had to go in the oven at 375. Then I made the cream cheese that goes in it. When it was cool, I put that in there. And it's, what is that, it's a springform pan. And altogether, this probably cost $15 to $20 to make it. So I put it in the oven at 500 degrees. You do that for 10 minutes and then drop it to 200 degrees for an hour and a half. I thought I did it. What I did was I used the top oven and put that at 200. Where the cheesecake was at 500. Because I had the fan on in the kitchen, I was reading in the living room. I didn't smell it until I smelled it. It was that color. I was so upset. I've been cooking and baking for 35 years. I screwed up good. Anybody can do it. And by the way, any of you who have questions about recipes or catastrophes or how to not have catastrophe, feel free to ask us. But, has it happened to you?
This morning, I think it was contagious, so I had to make a gluten-free cake because I thought it was Pem's birthday, but her birthday's in November. But it's Lee's birthday, so I was going to make an almond flour chiffon cake, which is a variation in my book. It's my recipe. It was kind of dense. Okay, that wasn't the biggest problem. I tried to get it out of the pan and it stuck. So I got it out. Now I have 2 8-inch round chiffon almond cake, and I have a beautiful quart of lemon curd. But it wasn't good enough to bring, so then I whipped up the 2 little cakes.
Well, I would say that those disasters, that's all kind of part of the fun. I mean, part of the great joy of cooking is experimenting, and my friends all joke that if I ever write a cookbook, it's going to be called I Didn't Do It Exactly. If you ask me for a recipe, I'll say, well, I got it out of here, but I didn't do it exactly like that. And for me, part of the fun is that experimentation, but with experimentation, of course, comes a lot of failure. So you just fail forward, you just keep trying, and you invite people that you care about, and they don't care if you have to, get pizza at the last minute because it didn't work out. So.
Well, actually, I often used, you are the perfect example, because I often would say to people, you can screw something up. And most of the time, it may not be that great, but it's edible. Unfortunately, yours wasn't edible.
Because Priscilla immediately said to me, use the goop and make something out of the goop. And I said, the goop smells like smoke.
Right. But I know Chris Prosperi was here last week, and he and I, for a number of years now, have written a column for the Courant, which I will say has just been a victim of freelance budgets. I kind of knew it was going to have an end at some point. But, here's Chris, who went to Culinary. I know. Okay. Culinary Institute of America. His father actually was an instructor at CIA. He's a pastry chef. And Chris is the most sort of down-to-earth restaurant chef I know. Because a lot of times he breaks the rules, and he was always, he always wanted our recipes to be, obviously for the home cook, because, it's people reading the newspaper, but things that people could play around with. And, I realize it's hard to encourage, maybe not hard to encourage, but it's hard to get across to people that, you just have to go for it. You got to have a little bit of confidence. And so if it's not the greatest meal you ever made in your life, well, you've learned something from it, and you haven't been a slave to a recipe either.
You have to be a little more perfectionistic
Well,
when
with
you're
baking, especially with baking, I was gonna say, that
Yes,
you can experiment
yes,
the first
right.
time with cooking, not with baking.
No.
I've tried that a lot, it just doesn't work out, but, yeah.
No, that's true.
My recipe that was on I think it was yesterday, on Wednesday,
Yep,
it came out. Somebody emailed me and said, did you really say 2 20-ounce cans of whole tomatoes? And it does call for 2 20-ounce. And she said, can it be diced? Can it be whole? Can it be something, or can it be stewed? So I emailed her back and I said, yeah, it really is 2 20-ounce cans of, and I said, I use Muir Glen. I don't use anything else. I buy it by the case and it's in my garage. But I said, you can use whole, you can use diced, you can use crushed, but don't use stew. Because there's other stuff in there that's gonna
Oh, yeah,
really
yeah, that's a good
change it. But when you're doing savory food, you can play around.
Yes.
But I tell people not to play around the first time.
And
Yeah.
that's, Jacques Pepin says the same thing.
Yeah, no,
so
I agree.
One of these days I'll listen.
Oh, he probably got that from me.
I think so, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you really need. So, another culinary experience. How many people here make good fried chicken? Come on, show your hands. Just a couple, just a few. Okay, how many people have failed at making fried chicken? Okay, all right, it's not my culinary background. Last night, Charlie wanted fried chicken legs he'd seen in a magazine. Of course, there was no recipe. I said, let's just make fried chicken legs. I used that ad hoc cookbook, Thomas Keller. I read the recipe for the first time. After you double batter it, he fries it at 320. Now, most frying's done at 350. And that's why I always burn the crust. So I made perfect fried chicken for the first time in my life last night.
I never
After
knew
like
that.
15 times of enduring
That's really
overcooked
interesting.
At
chicken crust.
320.
Yeah, who would?
I never knew that.
No, you'd think higher, right?
Because usually sometimes I don't do well with fried chicken because it'll be too dark on the outside.
Well,
Yes,
that's my
and
point.
maybe
That's what I'm
in-
saying.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
So
there's a whole
perfect.
moment with fried chicken. There's this Korean fried chicken that's big right now. Yeah, and it's always wings, so it's small pieces. And David,
Double fried.
double fried. But
Oh, it
David
was in the New York
Chang-
Times
David
yesterday.
Chang
Yes.
like steams the wings, so they're kind of pre-cooked.
smart.
And he batters it and fries it, and batters it and fries it. And that's what Charlie wanted, but that was too much,
Next
you know.
time.
Next time. But now that I've conquered frying, I just thought I'd share.
You know the secret about French fries, how to do terrific French fries? You do it twice.
And the Belgians do it 3 times.
Do they do it 3 times?
3 times, yep. It's really
You
dark.
put it in at about 350, 375?
More like 300 to start, because you're
300.
cooking them and then.
Then you take it off and drain it, and you can wait till the next day to do it again. Then you drop it up to 350.
Then you go up to 350, 360.
A little higher, and drop it again and take it out, and what you wind up with are the best outside and the silkiest inside. And that's how to do a French fry.
But in my house, everything is like a science experiment. And it's a problem. We have inventory. Now, we haven't owned a restaurant since 1990, and we still have inventory. So this is not the way you want to maintain things. Yeah, we're trying to turn over a new leaf. I threw something out yesterday. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, thanks.
Did any of you go to the restaurant Du Village? Do you remember it?
Oh, thank you,
people
all
than
you people.
fried chicken.
Yeah, really, we didn't do fried chicken. It wasn't a restaurant du village
But
cuisine thing.
actually, I have to tell another story. When Charlie's book came out, The Best Bread Ever,
20 years ago.
which it is
The
the
best
best
bread
bread ever. I called and set up a time to go and interview him to do a story about the book. You know, Charlie, lucky for us, was local to Connecticut, so it was easy, a great excuse to do a big story on him. And I go down to Charlie and Priscilla's house. This was pre-kitchen renovation for you. And I have to say that this whole process reminded me so much of my grandmother, who was this fabulous cook and turned out these incredible dishes, without 10 million gadgets and appliances and all that. But here was Charlie with this, as I refer to it, as this dumbbell GE oven that must have been about
that's right.
40
Oh, yeah,
years
right.
old.
Oh,
And
yeah,
he's
yeah,
turning
yeah,
out,
yeah.
you'd think, oh, well, you couldn't possibly
Forgot
make
about
great
that.
bread without a Vulcan, some fancy
17
restaurant
burner,
stove.
yeah.
So, that's the other thing. You don't need a lot. If you can trust yourself and trust your taste buds, you get a lot
So
done.
does everybody have like their own little cache of recipes you do well?
Yes.
I mean, that's really the secret, and
Yes.
that's how you start, I think. You
Yes.
have these things you feel comfortable with, and then you can build on that. And because if you can do those things, the world's your
Right.
oyster from a
Or
standpoint.
I
you,
just wanted
you
to-
grow up with none. My mother didn't cook, and the little bit that she cooked was not good. And I had a first husband who wanted meat, potato, and vegetables separated on a plate. And I didn't know how to do anything.
They have plates
But
for that.
then, after a divorce, I met my husband, who was so grateful that anybody would cook. That's why, because I didn't have to worry. He was gonna love it no matter what I did. Yeah. Well, you
was
didn't
a
grow
good
up
eater.
Priscilla went to Brown.
Yeah,
there
but I
you
mean,
go.
there you go, right? No,
Yeah.
I had good food growing up. I mean,
Oh, did you have good food?
my mother wasn't a good cook, my grandmothers
Oh, you
were.
see,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't have grandparents. Yeah.
But I
Did
wanted,
you?
Oh, yeah, my mom was a great cook. And again, like me, not a great, but she didn't bake that much. She probably would have been good at it. But I just wanted to go back to Linda's point. It seems to me that many of my friends who do have the big fancy kitchens and the multi-burner stoves and present company accepted, I'm sure. But they're the ones who like buy pizza and warm it up in the oven. And it often is, the people who just, they can cook anywhere.
Right,
It can be
yeah.
a galley kitchen
Sure.
and you figure out how to make do.
And if you have those core recipes, and because cooking with people is an incredible way to bond.
True.
And I work a lot in the almond industry, and I mean, I've cooked at these people's houses, and I have a few recipes for baking that are in my head. I can make with a bowl and a knife or
Oh,
in a
fun.
food processor. I just encourage people to think that way, because that's something you can bring with a salad dressing or, boiled tomatoes, whatever it is you have in your repertoire.
Well, Julia never grew up with anybody that cooked. Julia Child was from a fairly rich family, and they had people who did the cooking. She started to cook because she married Paul, who loved her. And they happened to be in Paris, and she went to the
Cordon bleu.
Cordon Bleu. Yeah. And, she didn't start as a cook. And I
that's right.
remember your mother. She was a good cook.
My mother was a good cook, and my father became a very good cook. When my mother went back to work full-time, my father took over a lot of the cooking duty, and he really loved it. But, yeah, I mean, I sort of didn't have a chance. Just growing up in this Italian family, it was just, food was everything, and it meant we would all be together. The family was always together on Sunday for this huge meal. I was just telling someone at one of the servers at our restaurant that when I was in elementary school, my northern Italian grandmother used to do calves brains, which was a specialty, and so we go. I remember this one dinner very clearly. We went for this dinner, and all the adults, my aunts and uncles, my parents, everybody's telling the kids, you can't tell anyone in school what you ate tonight because they won't understand. This was the 50s, and they barely understood, there was some discrimination then with Italians. They barely understood, spaghetti and meatballs. Brains weren't, it just wasn't going to happen. But it was the idea of trying something, of keeping a tradition alive, and of everybody getting together as a family and eating.
But so question for you, Lee. So I'm so intrigued when, you've written about your childhood memories of food and your mother's cooking and the rest of it.
And
so
the lack of it.
Exactly. So was it your experience in college, do you think? But I'm always struck by the fact, too, you talk about your second husband and his appreciation for your food. At what point did you become a lover of food and a food writer?
Well, I started as a restaurant reviewer.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I started that in 1976 in Worcester, Massachusetts.
And
then-
what, like, you just decided you woke up one day and I'm going to be, so how did you?
You know, pretty much.
Okay, that works.
I was an English major, and when
Great training for anything.
I was in, I think, 4th or 5th grade, and I remember, and I'm sad about this, I wrote an essay that won, and it was called A Day in the Life of a Woman President. I'm still waiting. But I like to write. I always like to write. And my family were readers, all readers. And there was a new magazine that was coming called Worcester Magazine.
Okay.
And the two guys were even younger than I was. I think I was, probably 25, 26 at the time. They were 22. So I went down to their office, which was in a little blue house. And I said, I would like to write restaurant reviews for you. And they said, well, what do you know about writing a restaurant review? And I said, about as much as you do about writing a magazine. And they said, okay, go do a restaurant review and we'll talk about it. And it was in Worcester, and I went to a Mexican restaurant that wasn't too far away, and I wrote about it. Didn't know anything about Mexican food, but neither did anybody else. That's the thing. And I want to also
Why did you
say-
want to write about restaurants at that point? Why didn't you go in and say, I want to write about art museum? Like, in other words, I'm intrigued by...
I didn't want to, I really, at that point, it was a new marriage. I didn't want to cook so much. I'd rather go out to eat.
Perfect. Okay, that's
Yeah.
smart lady.
The cooking came, well, when did I stop writing restaurant reviews?
In 98, 97.
Yeah, and that is, well, I was also the food editor at the Norwich Bulletin, but I became much more interested in what was going on in the kitchen than what was going on in a restaurant, at the table. And I had started at that point to cook a lot and enjoying it. Again, I had a husband who liked me cooking. And
makes
it
perfect
also,
sense.
you get to the point with restaurant reviews where they start to know who you are. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
If I move somewhere else far away, I might consider doing restaurant reviews again, but I can't now because they would see me coming into a restaurant. And once you lose anonymity, you can't do
you
it
can't do
anymore.
it. Yeah, it's
No, you
it's so
really
true.
can't. And I've started to like some of the chefs. I like,
You did that
last
book.
week when Chris was here, I told you that when I get in trouble when I'm cooking, I just call Chris and say, help me, I just did something isn't working. And he'll tell me what to do. I like having chefs that I can call,
Excellent.
Well, why did you start liking to write about food? She's a good cook, by the way. First editor I've ever had that knows food.
Oh, thank you.
You are.
Well, wait a minute, I was your editor.
really?
She meant other than Linda.
Yes.
Only kidding.
No, she's wonderful, yes.
So that's a great question. So I think that what came first is I was politics editor up at the Courant, and it was an awesome job, but it required an hour there and an hour back, and it was killing me. And so they had the opening as living editor at Shore Publishing, which publishes 7 weeklies along the shoreline in Connecticut River Valley. And I knew Brian, who was the editor there from way back, and they actually had approached me about taking a job like a while ago, and I didn't at the time. And then, but at this point, it was like the commute was killing me. Great job, but the commute was not so great. So he said, hey, we have an opening as a living editor, and before he finished the sentence, I'm like, when do I start? So I inherited the food court page from the previous editor who did an amazing job sort of setting it up. And it was through, I think, this particular, I wasn't a food writer until I was the politics editor, 2.5 years ago. But I became enamored of it because I realized, honestly, nobody ever stopped me and said, hey, you're the politics editor at the Hartford Courant, which was fine in a lot of ways, but food touches so many different, so it allows me to write about all the things I care about, all the things that are important, and people actually read it. And then they send me like letters and stop in the office and, you know, contribute their own recipes and.
You can always talk to people about food. I mean, in my life, I met one person who said to me, I don't care at all about food. I eat to live, period.
And they were lying.
Well, but anyone else, you could start a conversation. You can get to know someone.
It's common ground.
Yeah, it's great.
Always. And I've been told I'm old and nobody wants to date me anymore.
What?
But that is a great place if you're single to hang around in a supermarket. You'll know the men
Okay, I'm gonna try that.
who are cooking for themselves. You know who they are.
Which, the produce aisle or like
right.
what?
Yes. Yes.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Yes.
For a friend.
Probably not
some
like.
questions.
And no rain,
Yeah,
no
the
rain.
canned goods of the
You
area.
had a question.
There was a question?
If you could each share maybe one of your favorite restaurants other than Columnist.
It depends on the day. Do you have a favorite restaurant?
It depends on the day. but I
Sometimes
will
it's
say-
like whatever restaurant I'm eating at the time, but
Yeah. I've just been traveling and I've eaten amazing food, so
Restaurant.
I got to put that aside. But there's a new restaurant in Chester called Groton.
I have
And I'm sorry not to,
Yeah,
you know,
no,
it's
no,
different,
no,
it's
yeah,
different,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
different.
It is.
And
It's really
it's a young chef,
Lonnie and Joel
Joe
Gargano.
Gargano. He
Uh-huh.
comes from Branford, Italian-American.
Great people.
Using local grain, grinding it on premise, making their own bread, making pastas.
They're
He's
even
just a
making their own butter.
butter,
Yes.
yeah, but he's one of those
And it's-
serious young chefs, but he's good, and we enjoy going there.
That's,
Yeah, that's,
I'm
so that's,
gonna go to you and then I'm still thinking.
Is that where Six Main was?
yeah.
Yes.
I like Six Main very much, too.
That lemon salad restaurant, did you have that when you were there?
At Grano?
Yeah.
I don't recall that
No,
particularly, yeah.
I didn't remember either.
It's what's the name? I can't think of the name of the salad, but it's just, it looked really.
And by the way, Priscilla and Charlie make their own vinegar. You
It's
have
easy.
Well,
Yeah.
she says. it's
No,
easy.
but I mean, seriously, you can actually buy the mother, or if you've got a good vinegar with that little rubbery thing in the bottom, you know, save it and cut it in half and stick it in a bottle, and leftover wine, if there is any, that'll start. It takes about 6 months. We
Does
do it all
Chris
the
do it
time.
too?
Do you have a favorite? Actually, I decided what mine is, but you go on and
Well, locally, actually, we haven't been in a while, but we always liked River Tavern and Cafe Routier and Lives right in Saybrook.
All right, all great.
That's all in
And
our rotation.
my husband's a huge Pepe's fan in New Haven, and I tend to get cranky because you have to wait in line to get in, and then you have to wait, you know, but he always held that up as the best pizza around.
And I think it is too, and we've got one at Mohegan Sun.
Nice.
And unless it's like a weekend, you know, Memorial Day weekend or something, that you don't have to wait long. And you know, they own their own restaurant there. It is Pepe's. And is that third generation? Second or
I
third
don't know, I
generation?
think they're franchising.
But
Well,
I'm
it's a
telling
family
you,
sold
it is
out. I
also
know
the least
yes.
expensive place to eat. And the pizzas are as good as they are in New Haven.
So actually, I was going to jump in with actually all of the above, all the ones I love all of those. But one of my favorite restaurants, surprisingly enough, is my friends get tired of me. I drag them there all the time. But Shoreline Diner in Guilford, and here's why. So I actually developed a gluten sensitivity, much to my horror, many years ago, and it's hard. I mean, it's, you know, when people cook for you, I said food is love. It's like they're expressing, you know, affection for you, and if you start telling them, like, you know, I can't eat this and I can't eat that, it can be a little awkward. Eating out can be difficult. And Shoreline Diner makes it sort of easy to be you. They have vegan, they have vegetarian. If you're an omnivore, you'll be completely happy there. They mark their menus so that unobtrusively you eat dairy-free. I think the nut allergies are noted, the gluten allergies are noted. Usually when I go into a restaurant, especially if I'm with somebody new, I have to go through the whole thing about, oh, you know, I'm gluten sensitive, and it's a little bit awkward. And, but there I just sort of feel like, no matter who you are, you're welcome. We'll have something for you. It's reasonably priced. I've never had a bad meal there. And the people are nice, the servers are nice.
And their
I have an allergy
hamburger,
tip.
they get their hamburger meat.
No longer.
From
No longer.
Oh, they don't?
Yeah, I
have
actually
Paprika
spoke with
anymore?
like as of a month ago. So they actually decided that they could do higher quality. I think they're actually grinding their own now.
Which would
But
always be
based
the
on,
best, yeah.
La Frida burgers are amazing. But I think that they felt they could get higher quality by actually doing,
Wow.
but that's like a really super recent change, so.
Oh, then I'll have to go and see.
Yes,
Yeah,
we'll
because they
have to
do a
meet.
wonderful
Come.
hamburger.
Yes, they do.
I'm allergic to the smell of a griddle.
Really?
Fried eggs, oh man, I'd rather die.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's all deeply embedded in my family.
We'll have to
upbringing.
talk about it.
Yeah, that's a separate thing, but
they
I want to
don't- they
give you
don't
an
smell like a
allergy
griddle,
tip.
so.
Well, diner just makes me
Yeah,
think.
okay.
So we had a customer in the 80s, and he had a serious dairy allergy. He had a rubber stamp made, and he stamped it on a Post-it. And he had the little pack, they were already pre-stamped, and he just would give it said things on it, gave it to the server. Which, I mean,
Yeah.
I bet they even make things like that, just
Yeah,
to
I've
make
seen
double
people
sure.
Make up business cards, or it
Yeah.
looks like a business
But
card.
I mean,
with
the
allergy.
Post-it.
Yeah, because
well,
people do get confused. I've said, like, I have a gluten allergy, and they'll come back and they're like, okay, so you're vegetarian,
Yeah, right, yeah, it's all one thing.
No, I know I'm difficult, but no, but no, I mean, most places, actually many places now are trained about allergies.
It's really
very
critical.
rare. But in the rare places where you do run across, and for me, you know what, I'm gonna get a stomach ache and maybe feel weird for a couple of days, but for some people it can be life-threatening.
It
so.
must be, it's challenging in the business, right?
Well, you guys are.
Well, it
You're on
is.
the
And
receiving
I'm
end having to
amazed
cook
at how
for
many
it.
people have allergies I've never even heard of, like lemon juice.
Strawberries.
But, look, we had a server who had a nut allergy, and one night he came in for a shift, and the guys had made a pizza. They had put sliced apples, walnuts, and covered it in gorgonzola cheese, which sounded fantastic. It does. But George grabbed a piece of this pizza, didn't have his EpiPen with him, and he
Right.
went to the.
Yeah.
But then, so he had to go to the clinic. He didn't ask what was on this pizza. So my husband banned, well, we only had walnuts in the restaurant anyway. We don't use peanut oil at all.
Oh, banned.
He banned nuts from the restaurant. Then all the customers were complaining. People were bringing their own.
What?
Oh, how funny.
Because we do a gorgonzola walnut salad. And at the time, we switched to doing dried cranberries that we kind of macerated in balsamic vinegar. Well, put them on the stove, and those dried cranberries were fantastic.
And
But
you know,
everybody
you
wanted
can
the
do
nuts,
that
so we
at
went back
home.
to nuts.
Any of the dried anything, I have probably 5 or 6 different kinds of whatever. You can plump them up with booze, with balsamic,
yes,
warm
right.
it up. You've got something that's pretty amazing, and try that on a pizza.
Intense
But
flavor.
first, cover them with hot water, any dried thing, then put them in
Why,
drain.
because they absorb better?
It'll
or-
rinse off any excess sugar,
right,
it'll
that
help
makes
put the
sense. All
moisture
right.
in, that's the
Makes
baker's
perfect
secret.
And if you talk about Jonathan Rapp's restaurant, but Otto is the pizza one in Chester, and they put green olives in the pizza oven with what tastes like olive oil and maybe some spices.
I think they deep
and it's
fry them.
actually an appetizer.
Oh, they
fry
serve
them
that
at
at River
River Tavern.
Tavern. Yeah, they
Yeah.
deep
They
fry.
do it at
They
River
deep fry them at
Tavern.
River
Those
Tavern,
are
yeah, they're really good.
delicious. Those are yummy.
And these are things you can do at home. You know,
Well,
all
then,
you
yeah,
need
roasting.
is, but again, you're not gonna make mistakes. It's your own kitchen. Who cares? Yeah, Trace.
What's the name of Priscilla's new book and when is it coming out?
I've been writing this book for 15 years. It's called On Cooking, a textbook of culinary fundamentals. So it's a culinary textbook. You can find it on Amazon, and the 6th edition came out in January. And then I'm working on Baking, a textbook of baking and pastry fundamentals. We're working on the 4th edition. It'll be out next year sometime. Anyway.
Yes, Lib.
So that's not just a general question. Like, what do you think the new trends could be in food? And are there really new foods, or is it just pre-structured recipes?
Well, to the notion of new foods, I'm intrigued and a little bit appalled by this created meat stuff that's, have you heard about this?
Wait a minute,
Like,
is that the one
Cloning,
that?
you mean?
well, it's.
You mean fake, that
It's like.
it's not real
The one that's
food?
Well,
grown in-
but is it grown? Yeah, so.
That's
So
one.
it's sort of a, the health trend towards eating less meat and the rest of it, but they actually like manufacture it.
Right.
So I think that you could characterize that as a new product. Other than that, yes, I find that what is, what's old is new again, or whatever the saying is, that you think that there's all these new trends. And I actually had somebody submit a column about, it was like supposed to be some sort of new salad, and she actually found, talk about she had a classical education, like the Greeks and Romans were doing it, like, in times of antiquity, so.
The things with nuts too, though, the idea of nut yogurt being available,
Those
nut
it's
milk
pretty good,
yogurt
yeah.
at Stop and Shop, I was amazed, and the nut cheeses.
Yep.
I mean, nut cheese maybe no, I don't, I think that's
Don't
pretty
we
new.
call it frankenfood?
Well, that
the
Franken
creative
food
food
is-
is,
yeah,
yeah. I just, it might be good. It looks like a hamburger, and it sort of bleeds like a hamburger.
That's
but-
different, though, there's two things, there's
Okay.
that one's called the Impossible Burger.
Okay. But
So
that's,
it's
is that
only
like made
sold-
of vegetables?
Made of vegetables
Okay.
and stuff, and some hemes. Anybody in the medical field, like hemoglobin
Oh, I do know
hemes?
what
Yeah,
that is.
Chris
It's
was
not from
talking
blood,
about
but I
that
mean,
at
it's
college.
in
Okay,
there.
that's, like, that kind of scares me,
Yeah.
but.
But I've
yeah,
had
it might be
some of
okay.
them.
I don't know. What do
But
they
that's
taste like?
different from the fact that they're actually in labs really working with and growing meat.
Okay,
That
all right,
hasn't come
so-
on the market
so,
yet.
But
That's-
is that actual meat, or is it?
It'll
is
be
it-
from an animal, it'll be derived from the cells of
Oh,
something
yeah,
that once
no,
was
that just
alive,
feels
yeah.
weird.
That's not gonna appeal to vegan. Yeah.
Who knows, yeah.
I don't know about GMO, I mean, but that's
But
different.
of course, some of the things that we take for granted and are eating today, I'm sure that my grandmother would have been like, like, I would never eat that, so. I don't
No.
know. Maybe
My
we get
mother-
used to these things.
My mother worried about her weight all the time because she was 4'11". And when you're 4'11", you have to worry about your weight a lot. But she wouldn't buy anything that said low-fat or non-fat. She would never buy anything like that. Why would you want to get low-fat sour cream when it's in a recipe that you'll use maybe a quarter of a cup of it? Why should you eat a bad hamburger when you can get a good hamburger? The better the food is, the less you need. At least that's what I
Oh,
found.
no, I find the better the food, the more I eat. So.
Yeah, we tell ourselves
Yeah, I
that.
know.
That little bit of chocolate.
That's right.
The other food that's new, and I don't know where it's gone, but it speaks to people, the few people that just eat to live, is that product Solient, which is a beverage, some kind of a beverage, and the tech people are drinking this thing and surviving on it with energy.
Oh, like
and-
just that, like they're.
Just that.
Ugh.
Didn't they make a movie called Soylent?
Well, I
Yeah.
think it's slightly different, but it's
People.
very
That was
close
a long time
pronunciation.
ago.
Yes, Soylent Green was for people.
I wouldn't eat
Yeah,
any
what a
of that.
weird name they picked for it.
It's very close, right? I mean, maybe even the same.
Maybe not a good idea.
Yeah.
I don't know people who won't eat real food. I mean, I
You
know
think you
there
won't
are
associate with them? Or?
Yeah,
No,
right.
I won't.
You
She's
can't.
headed
There
them out
are
of
a
it.
lot of, and the older I get, the less I have any patience at all for this nonsense. I just really don't. I have an aunt who said she was allergic to like 3 or 4 other things. At that point, she was in her 70s or 80s, and she said, I was always allergic to strawberries. And I said, well, when did that happen? Well, she said, when I was 4 or 5 years old. Well, I technically had a crab and lobster, and it happened at your house.
Oh, my.
I was
No.
allergic, and I
She got
had a big
unallergic.
allergic problem. And I was very careful. I never had it. I was at Priscilla and Charlie's one night, and he was doing
Soft shell crab?
soft shell crab. And I
It's that
said to
time of
my
year.
husband, I don't care. I'm eating these, and then we'll just go to the hospital. And what happened to
Didn't
me,
make
it
us very
happened
happy.
in-
Guess
it
who
happened
wants to
in-
commit Harry
Atlanta
Paris?
City and New Orleans. And I usually had 2 or 3 hours before my hands would look like that.
Time enough for dessert.
So I said to my husband, we'll just go, as soon as it starts to happen, we'll go. Nothing happened.
That's amazing.
The next week, we were going somewhere where you could choose steak or lobster. And I said, I'm getting the lobster. Nothing happened. It was 10 years, I'm not allergic anymore.
That's
So,
such a
you
Lee
know,
story.
Yeah, I don't suggest that,
No,
you know,
really,
anybody
very
do what I
dangerous.
did. But you could take a little taste of a lobster bisque, a little
No, no,
teaspoon.
No, but sometimes,
No.
yeah, sometimes it can even be just a tiny.
No, no.
I know
it's
it
the
can.
top
We're-
most
so don't
allergen-
do it.
No, don't
We're
do
not
it. Yeah, right.
recommending
Don't do
this,
it. Really,
okay?
yeah.
Don't do this at home.
Or do it in the emergency room.
Or in a restaurant.
You actually, I believe you can get tested for your allergies, so that's a heck of a story, Lee, I gotta say.
Oh, that's funny.
One more question, or are we done? I think we're done. Thank you
Oh,
for
one more
being
question.
here.
One more, Lee.
When you were eating a favorite family meal, either in your own family or something you cooked, and a favorite blog. Favorite blog.
Blog.
Okay, I'll start. My new favorite blog is, okay, so Memorial Day weekend, I get together with friends of mine. We've known each other for like 35 years. We get together Memorial Day weekend and right before Christmas, and there's, my friend Kathy makes like 14 different kinds of cookies, and she bakes this whole meal. It's incredible. This year she made a pavlova. Okay, so that's the big meringue bottom, and then whipped cream and berries, and she got the recipe from Joy of Baking, joyofbaking.com.
good one.
It's awesome. And the reason why I love it is because the recipes look great. There's videos, and the videos are this woman, Stephanie Jaworski, and she's just so real. She's just Stephanie, and she's up there, and it's like your friend telling you how to bake, but she's very precise. So Kathy and I are actually going to attempt macarons for the Christmas party. Any tips? I will.
I'd like to try them too.
Okay, well, this will be
I'd
fun.
like to do
We're
it
going to
too.
wait till the fall because it's, you know, it can be humidity dependent, but it's so cute. So Stephanie, in her video about them, her voice is almost shaking because you can just feel like she so much wants us to work for you. And she's clearly, she has all these great tips and, you know, like aged eggs, which I didn't even know existed. But so yes, joyofbaking.com. And then my favorite meal is something my mother made when I was a child, and it's macaroni, hamburger, cottage cheese, tomato sauce, and I never knew what it was, and somebody recently described it as scumgullion, which I just love the name of it, which really mean, you know, it can be like anything, but again, it was one of those family meals that was just, it reminds me of sitting with my family in Toledo, Ohio. I had this weirdly idyllic childhood, you know, with all my siblings and my mom and dad and the dog under the table in case there was something I didn't like. So yeah, scumgullion with, you know, noodles and
Cool.
rest of it, yeah.
So cool. Wow.
I don't read blogs. I don't think I've ever read one.
Oh, there's so
You know,
many,
I just,
know it.
if I
You
have,
do magazines.
if I'm not eating and I'm not cooking, then I'm reading.
What's your favorite cooking magazine right now?
Oh, I love fine cooking.
Fine cooking is
But
always
I'm going to
good.
say something, Priscilla is going to gag when I say this.
Taste from home.
Oh, no.
Okay, good. All right,
Just
all right.
don't. No, don't.
Okay.
Not that it
I'm
doesn't
better.
sound good,
It's gotten
but,
better,
you know.
by the way, but still.
No, I love the one from Food Network magazine. I love it.
Not tested.
And my
Their
daughter
recipes
loves
don't
it.
always work out, but.
I will use ideas from
Sure.
magazines.
And you're,
I will,
you're an
yeah.
accomplished enough, yeah, you could
Yes.
probably, my experience with their recipes is that they're not always tested, so, yeah.
Well, actually, Cook's Illustrated is very good, and now
But it's
there's-
no longer,
But now there's Milk,
It's not
there's Milk
Kimball
Street.
anymore.
right.
You
Oh,
guys
okay.
are great to be here. And thank you all very much.
Yes,
It's
thank you
been
for
fun.
coming.
Do you
Thank you
think
for
we should
coming.
do this again next year?